Hello. Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be able to stand here and to share this morning with you, as Martin says, as we continue this series. Now, some of you will know me and will know that I have 3 children. And I'm going to make a confession this morning that makes me look like maybe not such a great parent. Because sometimes my children really annoy me. Now, I know that wouldn't be the case for you because you're all great parents. And sorry, Dylan sat down here. But there's some things that children do that just get under your skin, don't they? And can drive you to despair. My youngest child, Paisley, she's going to be 5 next week. And there's something she does daily that just gets to me. And it's this. I'm going to call it the curse of one more. Some of you are laughing because you know this. So if we're at the park and it's time to go, oh, please, Mummy, just one more time on the slide. If she's had some sweets and she's had maybe 3 or 4, oh, please, Mummy, can I just have one more sweet? This morning, as we were getting ready to come to church, she had stacked up pillows on our bed, standing on the top of it, and was dive bombing off that onto the bed. And while I was trying to say, come on, you need to get dressed. Oh, please, Mummy, just one more. Can I just do one more dive bomb? I'm like, no. We've got things to do and places to go. But you know what? You know this, don't you? You know this one more syndrome. You know what that's like. Just one more. Have you ever told yourself, just one more? That won't hurt. Do you know, one more cake? One more drink, just one more episode of our favourite show late at night. Surely that's not going to do much damage. You know, it seems pretty harmless, even maybe justified, that just one more. But just one more turns into 2 more, and it turns into 3 more. And before you know it, you're ending up in a cycle that it's hard to get out of. And you might even find yourself asking, how did I end up here? And here is where that becomes a problem, because one more rarely adds anything. In fact, one more usually subtracts and takes something away. Maybe takes something away from the things that you value most. Takes something away from the people who you spend life with around you. Let me just give you another example. Maybe the way you drive is influenced by this one more mentality. Now, if you're anything like me, you either drive at or just over the speed limit. And while most of us will feel no guilt about that whatsoever, none of us want to get caught by the police. Do we, Steve? If you don't know, ask Steve afterwards about his driving habits. So we've got this we've set ourselves this limit of where we think it is safe to drive at, don't we? And there's almost this unspoken rule of well, if we're in 10% over, then that's okay, we'll get away with it. So if we drive 33 miles an hour in a 30, we've told ourselves, well, it's okay, police aren't going to do anything about that, so it's okay. And my point is, whether it's our driving, whether it's our diet, whether it's our spending or our eating or drinking decisions, our natural inclination is to live as close to the line as possible, isn't it? How much can we get away with? And we live close to this kind of invisible line. And what is that line? Well, it's this. It's the line between legal and illegal. It's the line between responsible and irresponsible. It's a line between maybe what's moral and immoral. Or it's a line between ethical and unethical. Ultimately, it's a line between I'm still in control and I now need help. And it's human nature. It's human nature for all of us to snuggle up as close to that line as possible, to get away with as much as we possibly can without facing the consequences of it. Without maybe losing our job, without losing our house, without losing relationships, without being grounded, without being embarrassed. But the thing is, fueling that incessant almost flirtation with this is an assumption that informs many of our decisions. An assumption that, well, if we put basically, it impedes our ability to make good decisions for ourselves. And this assumption that I'm talking about, it makes life feel comfortable. It makes us live our life the way that we want to live our life. Here's the assumption that I'm talking about. It goes like this. If it's not wrong, well, then it's all right. If it's not illegal, then clearly it's permissible. If it's not immoral, it's acceptable. And ultimately, if it's not over the line, it's fine. Now, the problem of this, if it's not immediately obvious, is just put on your parent hat for a moment. Or if you've not got children, your kind of aunt or uncle or your brother or sister hat. As a parent, and I'd like to assume the same for you as for me, we do not set the bar that low for our children. We do not set the bar that low for anyone in our circle of our life that we care about, do we? I'm sure some of you, if you have got children, you might have a routine in the morning of saying, have a great day, be good, be kind. You might have a little mantra that you say to your children to send them off to school. What we don't say is, do you know what? If it's not illegal, knock your socks off. Do we? I mean, that would be some parenting right there. Because we expect more. We expect more of our children and we expect more of the people in our lives. Because essentially, when we take this assumption and apply it to our life, we're really asking, how low can I go? How close to bad can I get without actually being bad? And if you're a Jesus follower here this morning, or you'd call yourself religious, how close to sin can I get without actually sinning? But it doesn't stop there, does it? Because it also leads into then, how long can I neglect my family for without seeing the consequences? How long can I neglect my finances for and spend however I want without there being some disastrous consequence to that as well? And it all begins with us asking the wrong question. Is there anything wrong with this? That's the question we ask. When it comes to making a decision over anything, maybe it is something of a moral standing or an ethical question you've got. Maybe it's a purchasing decision or a relationship decision. And often we'll ask ourselves, is there anything wrong with this? Is there anything wrong with what I'm about to do? The problem is that question can often lead to, how did I get myself into this? Because when we draw our lines, if we set our limits, if we establish our own moral and ethical standards on what we would be happy to make, there is this borderline between right and wrong, legal and illegal, healthy and unhealthy. But the problem is, if we live close to that line, if we don't allow ourselves any space in that, there is no margin for error. And it's a real foolish and it's quite a dangerous way for us to live our life. I think most of us probably already know this, don't we? You don't go near a hot stove. We're taught that as babes in arms. And it's why also when we see someone else snuggling up close to that line, there's something inside of us that can predict and see where that's going. I think often it's easier, isn't it, for us to spot it in other people than it is in our own lives. When we see someone else who's about to make a bad decision, maybe our own experience or wisdom, we know that's going to end in disaster. We know intuitively that maybe there's a better question that should be asked. A question that if we ask will lead to a better decision. A question that if we ask honestly, if we act on it, we will avoid avoidable regret. And the truth is, if you and I, if we get into the habit of asking this question, we'll avoid regret as well. And that question we're going to look at this morning, it's our fourth question in this series, Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. Better Decisions, Fewer Regrets. Now, if you've been around over the last few weeks, or you've caught up online, we've been looking at this relationship between good decisions and actually the outcomes that has in our life. And that actually good decisions are coupled with good questions. So I'm actually convinced that, if we look at those questions we've been looking at over these last few weeks, and if we answer them honestly, we will live better lives. We will have fewer regrets. And so if you've been around in the first week, we looked at just making that decision of are we going to decide our way forward? How do you want to decide your way forward in life? And then we looked at the first question, which was called the integrity question. And this question was, am I being honest with myself? Am I being honest with myself, really? And we've said it a few times over the course of these last few weeks, and that the easiest person to deceive in our lives is the person that you see in the mirror. And it's true, isn't it? We're the ones that deceive ourselves the most. Because as long as we're lying to ourselves, you'll never get to where you want to be. Because you have to be honest with where you currently are. Our next question was the legacy question, and Em shared brilliantly about this, about what story do you want to tell? That, in the decisions that we make and the questions that we ask ourselves, we get to tell a story with our lives, whether that's relational, financial, academic, professional. The decisions we make based on what is the story I want to tell leads our life in a certain way. Because as far as it's up to you, we get to write our own story. And then last week, Martin shared with us, didn't he, the conscience question. And he asked us that question, is there a tension that deserves our attention? Maybe when everything looks good on paper, everything seems to be going well, but there's something inside, a bit of a niggle, something that you may be doubting or questioning. And so he asks us this question, what is the tension that deserves our attention? Where can we shine light on that in our life? And so then that brings us to this week, to our last, it's not our last question, it's our fourth question. And I want to call this the maturity question. Now, the reason I call this a maturity question, and I hope this is a personal challenge for you all, is because it takes wisdom. It takes wisdom to be able to step back from our decision or our life and to be able to ask this question. And the question is this: what is the wise thing to do? Now, you might remember back, I think it was the first week, we looked at this verse in Proverbs, and it says this: the prudent see danger and they take refuge. See, the prudent see danger and take refuge. You could change that word prudent for the wise or the mature. Because it goes on to say, but the simple, they keep going. And what happens? Well, they pay the penalty. They're the ones where maybe they get to live in that regret because they didn't see what was coming. And so this morning, as we kind of explore this question, what is the wise thing for us to do? What is the wise thing to do when making any decision of any consequence? So what is the wise thing for you to do? Maybe you're facing a question or a dilemma, and the option you're considering, it isn't illegal, it isn't unacceptable, it's quite a permissible thing, maybe it's quite a moral thing and an ethical thing. But is it the wise thing to do? A decision, and this is quite key, a decision can be both not wrong and unwise at the same time. A decision can be not wrong in that it could be an okay decision, but can still be unwise at the same time. I recently had an example of this in that I was asked to consider whether I would join a board of trustees for a charity. And it's a charity that I love, a charity that I completely get on board with their mission and their values. And there was nothing wrong with joining this board. And it's something that I felt could have been good for me. Hopefully it would have brought some worth to the charity as well. But in considering it, I decided, although there's nothing wrong with doing it, it would have been an unwise thing for me to do. Now, the commitment would have been maybe 4+ days a year, and so it would have had an impact on our life at home. There would have been additional emails and phone calls, I'm sure, and again, taking up time from something else. And so the question, was it the wise thing to do? I had to consider, do I have the time for this commitment right now? And so the wise and maybe the mature thing to do was to say no. Now, isn't it true that often your biggest regret, and I mean that one thing that sticks in your mind, as soon as I say your biggest regret, you will go there. And it may be a recent thing or it may be years and years back. But your biggest regret, that thing that you would do anything to go back and redo, that thing that you would change if you could go back and rewrite time, that biggest regret probably started with a few decisions that you wish you could have done differently. It was probably preceded by a series of unwise decisions. Maybe you weren't wrong. Maybe they weren't illegal. They weren't immoral. But looking back, they were terribly, terribly unwise. And that series of unwise decisions paved the way to that moment of regret that you now wish that you could get rid of. So to avoid that, how do we avoid this just one more syndrome? How do we avoid having more instances of regret? Well, we ask ourselves this question: what is the wise thing for me to do? What is the wise thing for me to do? Now, there's a guy called Paul in the Bible, and he was a follower of Jesus, and he wrote a lot of the latter part of the Bible. And he spells this out for us in a letter that he wrote to Christians who were living in a place called Ephesus. And the letter that he wrote to them we call the book of Ephesians in the Bible. And this is what Paul wrote. He goes right to the heart of this tension that we all live with. He says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise." Not as unwise, but as wise. Making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. See, it turns out those living in the first century aren't that different to you and I living now. See, ancient folk and as modern folk are all prone to living carelessly and unwisely, and maybe making some poor decisions along the way. Maybe we're all prone to snuggling up to that edge of disaster, to that line that we try hard not to cross. But Paul comes along and he's saying, stop it. He's saying, I want you to be careful how you live. Be wise in how you live. Don't be careless. See this, what Paul is saying, this is the lens that we can put through any decision that we need to make in our life. We can put this through this. Whether it is a financial decision or a relational decision. Whether it is a professional decision. What is the wise thing for me to do? Paul continues in his letter with a bit more of an explanation. He says, making the most of every opportunity. Literally, in the Greek, this phrase could be translated as redeeming time, that making the most, redeeming or ransoming time. And who of us doesn't want to spend our time better, hey? If you go back to that moment of regret that maybe came into your mind a little while ago, wouldn't you do anything to redeem that time that thing has taken from you? Wouldn't you like to redo that in a different way? Wouldn't you like to invest that time in a more wise way? I do. And maybe for you, it might just be a few moments of regret. Maybe it was a week or months, or maybe it's even been years of regret. Some decisions you made years ago, and it has changed the trajectory of your life. And you hope that you could go back and you could redo that. Just imagine where you'd be today if those decisions were different when you made them. And I know that's hard. I know that's hard to go back and to think about maybe things we should have done differently. But what Paul is doing is he's giving us an invitation to think differently from now on in. He's inviting us to invest our time more wisely from this moment in time, from this day forward. He's inviting us to redeem and to leverage our most valuable asset, our time. To invest our time in a way that actually propels us forward to our preferred future, rather than holds us trapped in something we've done in the past. He writes, make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Now, it's a bit of a weird and an odd warning, isn't it, this bit at the end, saying the days are evil. What on earth is he talking about in that? Well, do you know, I think we already know this. We don't live in a morally or ethically neutral culture, do we? I mean, just think about it. Just this last week, we've been part of the debate around assisted death, haven't we? Now, wherever you stand on that decision, it is not a morally neutral decision. It wasn't clear-cut, hence why there's been a big debate about it. Hence why, even in this room, we will stand on opposite sides of that. Because it's not neutrally moral or ethical. Or how about this? When was the last time you went and bought something in a shop and the salesperson said, actually, hold on, don't buy it just yet. You go home, you think about it for a week and come back in a week's time and then I'll help you buy it. Doesn't happen, does it? Or what about when you went and had coffee at Costa? Did the person serving your coffee challenge your thought to have cake with your coffee? So, oh, hold on, do you really want that cake with your coffee? I mean, it wouldn't be good for them, would it? But it doesn't happen because the temptations and our culture goes against everything that is wise. And that is Paul's point. He's saying that the days are evil. Our culture is not set up to help us make wise decisions. Paul is saying, do you know what? This is on us. This is our responsibility. This is your and my responsibility to make wise decisions for ourselves. Our culture, the gravitational pull of our culture is now, isn't it? Not later. It's more, not less. And do you know what? This is why I think this question could be the best question yet. And I want to suggest, as we kind of try and anchor this question and to form this question solidly in our mind, I want us to ask it through a certain perspective. I want us to look at this question through the perspectives of our past, our present, and our future. And I think it's all right to now start mentioning A Christmas Carol or Muppets Christmas Carol if you're an 80s child like me, because this helps it stick in my head. When you think about Scrooge and how he was visited from ghosts of the past, present, and future, this is how I kind of imagine it. But there's a guy called Andy Stanley, way better than Muppets Christmas Carol, a guy called Andy Stanley who's a pastor in America, and he has inspired a lot of this content. But he quite famously says a phrase over and over again. And he says this. He says, in light of my past experience, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of my past experience, in light of my current circumstances, my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? Now, hear me on this, because our past, our personal past, will predispose us to certain temptations and certain addictions and blind spots. And they will look different for you than they will for me. What I stumble over may not be an issue for you, and vice versa. So in light of your own personal experience, in light of the things you've done in your past, decisions you've made, what is the wise thing for you to do? If we maybe put every decision, every invitation, every opportunity we had through that question, if we filtered it through that, what would that look like? In light of your past experience, what is the wise thing for you to do financially? Did you before maybe rack up thousands and thousands of pounds in credit card debt and you've cleared it and you're just about to make a big purchase on a credit card? Is that the wise thing for you to do? Have you just come out of a relationship? And is it the wise thing for you to do to jump straight back into another one? In light of my past experience, what is the wise thing for you to do? And then my current circumstance. Now, you know this, life is seasonal, isn't it? Life changes. Sometimes life is busy and sometimes life is a bit slower. There's different priorities, different things that take your time. And so in light of your current circumstances, is the decision you're about to make, is it the wise thing for you to do? You know, the decision I made about joining the charity board was based on this, that actually life is quite busy for us as a family at the moment. We've got 3 kids that are at that stage where they just want to be run around from one activity to the other. I have a fairly busy job, and life is busy. And so in light of my current circumstances, and I know that that's not always going to be the case, that wasn't the right decision for me to make. So when asking this question, what is the wise thing to do? Think about your current circumstances. Think about your current state of mind and your emotional state. You know, I just said a second ago about did you just get out of a relationship? Now, you know, there's nothing necessarily wrong or illegal or immoral about getting into another relationship. But currently, is that the right thing to do? Would it be right to take all of those emotions that are trailing along with you into a new relationship? Remember, our greatest regrets, and often I mean relational ones, were preceded by a series of unwise decisions. So jumping back into the dating game straight after a divorce isn't usually a great idea. It's going to lead to regret. And then thirdly, this leads to our final perspective. So in light of our past, our current circumstances, and thirdly, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? In light of your future hopes and dreams, chances are you may have somewhere where you want your life to go. Have you got a picture in mind of how you want life to be? Some of you may have even written it down if you're a bit of a journaler. But I'm guessing when you envisage your future life, You do not envisage being alone. I don't think anybody really does. But when it comes to our dreams and our hopes, the problem is culture, life, everything is stacked against us. Because life is hard on our dreams. You may well go back and think, do you know what? When I was younger, I had a dream that I was going to do this, and my life was going to look like that. And life happens, doesn't it? And that dream slowly diminishes to very little left at the end. Because life is hard on our dreams. But I don't want any of you or myself to rob ourselves of our own future. Nobody plans to undermine our future, do we? It just happens through a series of bad decisions. Do you know what? Quite a few years ago, I was involved we used to lead a course called Love, Sex and Dating. And it looked around all of kind of this whole thing around dating, and either for people who are new to dating or people who are getting back into dating, and looked at whether they were wise decisions to make. And do you know what? I loved leading the course. I feel really passionate, actually, about people making good decisions in relationships. Because I have seen when it goes wrong. I've seen when some bad decisions, later on down the line, people live in a huge regret. Because they think, do you know what? I shouldn't have made that decision back then. And I think this is one particular area where these things can be really helpful to us. In light of our past experiences, in light of my current circumstances, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for me to do? The problem is, we have to make a decision right now today. Am I prepared to face up to that question? Am I prepared to take that question and answer it honestly, and then do something about it? Because we have excuses, don't we? We all do. We make excuses for ourselves. We make excuses for other people. And do you know what our excuses do? They take us to the threshold of regret. Our excuses will walk with us right up to that line that we never intended to cross. Our excuses will even go one more and probably try and take us over that line. You've been there. I've been there. And you don't really want to go there again. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to stop making these excuses and to step way away from that line that we don't want to cross? Well, it is in answering this question. In light of your future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for you to do? Where do you want to be financially in 10 years' time? Do you dream of being mortgage-free? Or what are you doing today to get you there? Do you long to be in a relationship and have a family? What are you doing today that's either going to hinder that goal and that dream or is going to help you to get there? Do you know what? If you don't decide, you know who'll decide? Other people around you will decide, especially when it comes to financial dreams. You know, retailers and lenders who don't care anything about you, they'll decide for you how you'll spend your money. Social media, TikTok shop, they'll decide for you. And what's true financially is also true relationally. It's also true academically, professionally. Where do you want to be? You need to decide right now where you want to be. And in light of what you ultimately want, whether it's relationally or romantically or financially, what is the wisest thing for you to do right now? And it's a hard question to answer honestly, because it will take us actually doing something. It takes us back to the first question we looked at in this series, saying, actually, how real are we being with ourselves? Are you being honest with yourself, really? Come on, are your current relationships, are they paving the way to the preferred future? Are the way you're spending your money, is that paving the way to the way you want financial freedom? Or where you are professionally, or what you're doing with your time, what you're doing now, is that paving the way to where you want to be? And who or what is putting that dream at risk? You know, if you're married and your dream is actually you want to see this out, your time with your spouse, and you want to see grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and you want to enjoy that together, who is or what is putting that at risk? What do you need to do now in order for that realised future? And as we kind of finish this morning, I want to say this: don't settle for good. Don't settle for legal. Don't settle for something that's just moral or just ethical or something that's even just tolerable. I think that if you do, you'll end up living close to that line. And you're better than that. You're better than that. Your family, the people who depend on you, your friends, they deserve better than that. You know, think about this just as we close. You are a unique blend of your past experiences, your current circumstances, and your future hopes and dreams. All of those things come together to make you, and that is completely unique. There is no one else like you. No one else has had your experiences. No one else is in your current circumstance, and no one else has exactly the same hopes and dreams as you. And so if you don't plan it and act on it, you will be living in regret. And so as I finish, I want to say to you, what is the wise thing for you to do? You owe it to yourself because you're better than that. So one last time, in light of your past experience, in light of your current circumstance, and your future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing for you to do?